I'm Sandy Onfong, here today with Fran Claggett Holland, who is going to read some of her work to us. Let me tell you a little bit about my guest. Fran Claggett Holland is a poet, teacher, and dog lover who loves to see others' poetry dreams materialize. After nearly 60 years with her life partner, Fran is now dedicating herself to poetry in both a personal and a larger sense. She is grateful for the community that sustains her in her years, not of retirement, but of heartfelt engagement with close friends and her poetry group, as well as other poetry groups beyond Sonoma County. Locally, Fran is involved with the Redwood Writers, the largest writing group in California. Through that group, with Les Bernstein, Fran co-edits an annual poetry collection of members' writings. After many years of teaching at the high school and university levels, Fran taught poetry and memoir writing for the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at Sonoma State University. During her post-teaching years, Fran offered poetry workshops throughout the country, as well as in Guam, Panama, and the Virgin Islands through the National Writing Project. Her interest in brain research led her to develop new approaches to reading, writing, and thinking using metaphorical graphics. She's received many awards for her teaching and writing, including the Lifetime Achievement Award from the California Association of Teachers of English. Fran has also written and co-written more than 5 nonfiction books for teachers and was the primary generator of California's writing test for students, a very new approach to assessment used by all middle school students. Fran and her partner, Madge Holland, team taught many students and worked together to establish the first humanities course for high school students in California. Fran was also the first teacher to use the newly created Poets in the Schools program at San Francisco State. Her first poet was Adrienne Marcus, one of California's most prestigious poets. She's been fortunate to know a number of really fine, well-known poets. She and Madge met Robert Frost at the Breadloaf School of English, where he lived just down the path. In California, she also became well acquainted with Robert Duncan, Eve Merriam, and Carolyn Kaiser. She met others through her work with the National English Teachers programs and has stayed in close touch with several of her writing students. Fran's own poetry has been largely influenced by Wallace Stevens, who remains her favorite poet, along with so many others, too many to name. Her poetry books include her latest book, Under the Wings of the Crow, which includes new and selected poems, Blackbirds and Other Birds from Torian Horn Press, Crow Crossings and the Consciousness of Stone, both from Risk Press, and Moments with Madge, Lux Aeterna from the White Crow Press. Please welcome my guest, Fran Claggett Holland.
Thank you, Sandy. I appreciate your opening. I'm going to start right away with my first poem out of my first book, with the Blackbirds and Other Birds. It is not enough to know the birds, only at noon. At noon, you say, see, it is a tern. I know it by its red beak. Or look, the gull has gray wings. Or still again, the blackbird has frightened the purple finch. At noon, we know a thing by its color. It takes the sun rising or falling to turn the white gull black. We must go colorblind to see the shape a wing makes. The second poem I'm going to read is also a bird poem. This one is from my latest book, actually the first. This is a ghazal, which they tell me is pronounced guzzle, but I don't like the way that sounds, so I still call it a ghazal. It was the buzzard that got my attention. Lying there, all intention lost to sky. Thinking of nothing else, neither buzzard nor I, wings of angels thrust broken into the bleak black sky. All intention lost in obsidian silence, angels and buzzard united in star-studded stillness. Then I, focused on intention, buried my eye, seeing deep into the aching loss, while that black bird of heaven charged with the cleansing of the soul, gave up its dark duties of the visceral night, lost to sleep, lost to waking tension of the day, lost, O buzzard, to heaven's wing. I'm sure all of you who drive around our county are appalled at the amount of the birds and the other animals that are killed on our highways. And I just wanted to mention, there is a book out that all the paintings are done by Robin Eschler, who's a local artist. And Barry Lopez wrote all of the things about the animals that were killed. This has to do with birds that were animals of all kinds that were killed on our highways. The next poem I want to read is very special to me because it's to one of my two sons, my two only sons. And it happened, excuse me. It was the poem that Naomi Shihab Nye, you probably know of her work, she picked it out from my books to publish in the New York Times magazine section, which was kind of prestigious for me. And it was for my son, Michael Franco, who is a writer himself and has written more than one book. It's called On Taking the Measure of Your Book. There must be a way to enter your poetry, the way your words turn into meaning after meaning, into the depths of memory, into the silence of the beach, which of course is never silent, but it seems so when I am there alone. And then the birds come over the dunes, the tiny sandpipers silent in sand, creating the rhythm of your poem. And far out beyond my eyes, the great white pelicans, and as I watch them, I see how I must enter your poetry, wings folded against the wind, as I slice again and again into the measure of your ocean, there where silence is translated into language. That poem is also just very recently, I don't know if you can see this. Here's a photograph that's of me actually looking out at the ocean for those pelicans. This is a digital paper that the Bay Area Writing Project puts out about 4 times a year. And it's completely digital, but I sent that poem in because I like it. When one of the questions that Sandy asked was, am I interested in other forms of art? Of course, music and painting immediately spring to mind. So I'm going to read you a poem that is called Adagio Cantabile, which is the title of the second movement of Beethoven's Sonata Pathétique. Sometimes memory isn't really memory at all. It starts off that way, but underneath it is the what if of your life. You write about the way you played Beethoven when you were 15, but really you were writing about what if you were still playing Beethoven, the Pathétique, the second movement, which cast a spell over everyone. They closed their eyes and came close to floating, leaving the old upright there where it stood in the dining room, with you dazed and floating too, and everyone humming the familiar melody of your childhood, translated into the reality of your 15-year-old self, alone on the stage of every recital you were ever in, and your mother and father and brothers and aunts, and even Beethoven himself, smiling as you whisper, is this the way you hear it now that you are deaf? And he nods, and the tears come, and he sits down beside me and puts his hands over mine. The music has always been very important to me. Here's a Wallace Stevens inspired poem. It's called My Father on the Page. Once, out of the blue, my father, my serious father, not given to excess, not given to hyperbole or metaphor, said, I always thought I would grow up to be a poet. No elaboration, no mention of reading poetry in his youth, just that. Years later, reading Wallace Stevens for the first time, the entire opus at one sitting, turning page after page, sitting on a small cot in our cottage at Breadloaf in Vermont. I remembered that moment. My father, a poet, what would it have been like? What might he have written? And now reading these poems, I know almost by heart. I know why I was reading Wallace Stevens, poem after poem, hardly breathing between them, knowing I was breathing them into my being, into my brain, into my heart, knowing for the first time in my life, my father on the page. Here's another poem influenced by another poet, Richard Wilbur. And Wilbur wrote, poetry rescues an idea from abstraction, giving it persons, places, and things. My poem in response, which actually is a sonnet. Wilbur is right to rescue ideas with poetry. Abstractions do not live without the persons, the places, the things. Perhaps we ourselves are abstractions. Perhaps we rescue ourselves by creating places we have made our own, leaving a trail of fences, moving the Picasso, the fragile sculpture Mujer del Roboso, and the bags filled with stones from our retreat at the ocean. Losing touch with this reality, I withdraw, disappear into the imprecise, the vague, the general. It takes the other then to rescue self, ground the scattered light. For us, illumination is here in this last place, with these things, with this you. And I'm still thinking now, still of my partner, called I Took Her Name. I never thought to change my name. Born knowing it was women I loved, we did not have the custom reserved for others. Marriage was not a possibility, even though we lived together, worked together, shared everything, dreams, clothes, dogs, bed. After 54 years, during which life changed around us, laws that had seemed written in stone opened up new ways of thinking about our lives. We married thinking it was for the cause, but found it was really for us. Still, we never thought to change our names until not the way we planned it. We were to be together somehow. She was gone. I alone remained, living for both of us. And I wrote a poem, signed it as usual. Then, almost without thinking, added a hyphen, and her name became mine. This is another, this is an uncollected poem. It's a fairly new, actually last summer, I guess, called A Field Guide to Memory. Memory is something that comes up so often in my poem. I guess it's because of my age. No one else is alive who remembers. The future in the poem is not beholden to its past. Carefully, I fill in the dates in April, only one birthday there, but March was busy with birthdays and doctors. It is March, and the poinsettia's red leaves are still hanging, creating a future that may outlast the calendar. Departures from the ordinary, the familiar, the prosaic, art as technique, predictable as neurons in their hippocampus, move in the direction of tropes. Undefined miracles, secrets, myths. Notice the visible quality of silence, drawing the line over the unsaid. End with the image, don't explain. The bird woman stands by the window, dreaming in cloud cover. The woman just appeared in that poem for the first time, and she keeps coming back. Came back in another poem called Saying the Unsaid. Bird woman returns, stands at the window waiting. No, she hears, go to the door, open it. Far in the distance, a flash of movement, then stillness. silence. She turns, sees in the window what lives in the silence. What was always there beside her is relentless devotion. This was written for my dog Magic, a Saluki, who died in August. And that flash in the distance was her seeing him again. Everybody says, do you write about the pandemic? Well, yes and no. And this one is sort of, as you'll hear. And it begins with an epigram from Adrienne Rich, another poet whom I am quoting. She said, "It's time in times like these, it is necessary to talk about trees. In times like these." Part one. Listen, you are overwhelmed, you are unprepared, you are terrified, but open the window. Listen to the voices outside. They have gathered there, your mothers, your daughters, your nieces, your sons. Yes, your sons, and most clear, most articulate, most anguished, your sisters. Put out your hand. Let yourself be led away from the window toward the door. Listen, outside you will hear the trees. You will hear the wind in the aspen. You will notice the silver undersides of the poplar leaves. Listen to the sounds of these leaves, these trees. Listen to Daphne tell of what she learned as a laurel tree. Part two, Daphne speaks. I once lived among the waters, the rivers, the springs, a tide pool at the bottom of a waterfall. My father, Peleus, the river god, protected me from lustful Apollo. Now my leaves bend to the wind, and I listen to the aspen, the poplar. These trees too have known the waters of life. In this time of cosmic upheaval, remember when you were born of water and ran with the naiads along rivers and oceans. When you emerged from Mother Earth, you, like me, were overwhelmed, terrified, unprepared for life without the cool waters. Life as a tree gives stability and communion between earth and sky. My leaves change and fall as I navigate my world. Listen, in these times, imagine possibility. Walk the sands that surround you. Notice the small. The sea anemones affixed to a rock in its watery home. See how it spreads its tendrils. The pale lapis and deep magenta, shades between those of the artist's palette. Step into the tide pool, reclaim the waters of your birth. Look to the frog, how it moves, the gathering in, the leap, the landing, limbs folded, silent as stone. This is a kind of experimental fun poem. How to prevent the pull of gravity. Spread silk over wool, Birdwoman says. Silk over wool. Gravity pulls you to the earth, grounds you in this life. Music, friends, wool. Spin, weave, give scarves to love. Your heartbeat in wool, no pulse, rhythm of love. Spread silk over wool, filter of light extracts essence. Rainbow silk, prism of rough wool, holds, morbs, the warp and the woof. Films the texture with a silk screen of light. Silk spun out of air, life stuff, moon made. The Birdwoman spins words out of light. Rapunzel, spin me a dream. How do I know your name, princess of the long golden hair spun out of myth with Arachne, Chandra? Hold, center on silk, spread over wool. Gravity, levity, right, left, center bounds. Choose your space, fill it with light. The light holds, the word light touches the heart of love with love. Spread silk over wool. In case you wondered how to prevent the flow of gravity. Spread silk over wool. The tree, the wind, the birds. Outside my window, there's a tree that's a very small tree. and it bends with every windstorm. We had a windstorm a few weeks ago, and this is the poem I got. This is very new. The tree, the wind, the birds. Bending almost horizontal in the wind, the bird and berry tree shook full of leaves and held on. The quiet that ensued was like that of the choir when the director held her baton, still, upright, waiting for the first down sweep of voice. Then the sounds of after, the cedar waxwings, eager to see the purple berries without the coloration of falling leaves. The strong contralto, unbending the sound of twisted wood, stretching back to before. The tiny nuthatches suddenly there for all to notice their high piping, punctuated by the goldfinch, never bothered by the ebb and flow around them. But then, once again, aware of the baton, as the cello took precedence and bathed the day with sound so pure, it gathered up all the remnants of the wind, the tree, the birds, into a form so true and profound. We all joined that singularity of sound that traveled with us to the stars. And maybe one more short one. This is called Until. Your story is not my story. Your dog is not my dog. You loved your dog. He was the best dog in your world. I loved my dog. He was the best dog in my world. We grew old. I had to keep living. He wouldn't know what to do without me. I had to keep living so he would keep living. That's how it was. Suddenly he grew old faster, as did I. One day he just lay down and died, as did I. My dog is not your dog. Your story is not my story until it is.
Thank you so much, Fran. That was a beautiful reading. Got a really good taste for your poems. I love the bird woman
Yeah,
motif.
too. I hope she
And
keeps coming.
it's wonderful how that comes back in poem after poem. It's a nice thread to trace through all your poetry, and so enjoyed talking to you and listening to you. So thank you very much for being our guest, Fran.
Thank you.